want to talk about the early NASCAR wives, and I'm talking from the beginning till up into the 70s at least, and I'll even be going up around 2000. And I'm going to concentrate on two of them because I'm familiar with them, and sadly neither one of them is with us anymore. The first one I'll mention will be Lynda Petty, aka Mrs. Richard Petty, passed away a few years ago. And the second one will be Judy Allison, aka Mrs. Robert Arthur Allison, better known as Mrs. Bobby Allison. What these two women went through in their husbands' careers, and just first some general information. Back in the 60s and before, you had drivers getting hurt and killed fairly regularly, unfortunately. They had to think about that every time their husbands went to a race. If they say they're not thinking about it, I frankly didn't believe them. Even today, you worry. As far as NASCAR's come with the safety, I mean, the Ryan Newman crash proves that. Walks out of the hospital 2 days later, hand in hand, with his two daughters on either side of him. But let's start with Lynda Petty. In 1961, Richard Petty was coming into his own as a driver. Lee Petty's career was going to be winding down. They go to Daytona. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true or not, they only had two cars. Of course, they took both of them to Daytona. One for Lee, one for Richard. Kyle Petty would have been a baby in arms pretty much then. Now, in the first qualifying race, which I understand was run on Friday of that year, Richard Petty crashes and goes out of the racetrack, literally. He's banged up, but all right. And Lee Petty actually wants Richard to drive his car in the second qualifying race, and Richard says, and I heard this on the Dale Jr. download, said, I've got glass in my eyes, I can't see. So Lee Petty drives his own car in the second qualifying race, and him and Johnny Beauchamp, ironic that he's the one that was Lee Petty and Johnny Beauchamp in that fantastic finish in '59, get together and go out of the speedway. There's been speculation over the years that Beauchamp did it on purpose. Now, you know, both Lee and Johnny are deceased, so not going to argue the point. Well, Lee Petty is gravely injured. They're told at one time they don't think he'll survive. Of course, records will show he survived, but literally, Lynda Petty with a baby in arms. I don't believe the daughters were born yet. Not sure about that. I can't find it on the internet. The family business is basically wiped out. The patriarch laying in the hospital near death. Of course, records will show he lived till well up in his 80s, so Lee Petty calls Richard's brother Maurice, and Dale Inman, the cousin, in, and says, go home, go up to the dealer, and this way you built cars back in, get a car. And Richard Petty continued racing. He had finished second in points in 1960, missed some races in 61, but he comes back. Well, 62 he was, and 63 he was second in points again. Then 64, they go to Riverside. And Joe Weatherly, the two-time defending champ, is some laps down after some mechanical problems, put him in the pits, goes through turn 6 at the Riverside Road Course, and something happens, hits a wall, killed instantly. So you know that's got to be weighing on their mind. Well, then they have a great race at Daytona, the Pettys do. The Chryslers come out with a Hemi engine, and they blow everybody out of the water. Win the Daytona 500, Richard's first super speedway win, and he's having a great season that year and winds up winning the championship. But along the way, there's some bumps in the road. At the World 600, run around Memorial Day at Charlotte, Fireball Roberts crashes is badly burned. Cars didn't have fuel cells in, they had stock tanks. He would die a month or so later, and just as the teams are getting to Daytona for the firecracker race, the one that's had been run right around 4th of July weekend. Back then, it was run on the actual 4th of July. It didn't matter what day it fell on. Well, Petty goes on and wins the championship that year, but that year is not without tragedy by any means. And what happens is, well, and let's just mention Indianapolis, on, I believe, a first lap crash, both Eddie Sykes and Dave McDonald, and Dave had some NASCAR runs and some good runs. He didn't win any or killed at Indy. So around Memorial Day in 1964 was a very bad time. On top of that, in a tire test later in 64, Jimmy Perdue is killed in a tire test crash. So that's got to be, and these were Joe Weatherly, Fireball Roberts, and Jimmy Perdue. These were top drivers. These were no slouches. Then as they get into 1965, just barely into the year, Billy Wade, who had replaced Joe Weatherly on the Bud Moore team, is killed in a tire test at Daytona. In 1965, the Hemi engine is either banned or heavily restricted. I'd have to look it up. And so Petty goes drag racing, runs a few USAC stock car races from what I've seen, and tragedy strikes there. Something breaks on the car goes into the crowd, kills an 8-year-old boy, 8 or 10-year-old boy. They settle out of court. I'm sure Chrysler put up some money on that, but terrible. And I read years later Richard Petty had to get counseling over that. I'm not surprised. That's when they knew back then injury or death could happen in racing, but that's when it goes out of bounds, so to speak, into the crowd. 1966 comes along. Petty wins Daytona again, has a fairly good year, but misses some races, I believe, with a non-racing related injury. David Pearson won the championship. In 1967, Richard Petty has an unbelievable season. 27 wins, 10 in a row. 68, Petty's hurting on super speedways. Well, he wants to go to Dodge and Chrysler Corporation, who's backing them at the time. But back then, all the good drivers were factory backed. And they say no. So Petty says, okay, I'm going to Ford. 1969, he runs Fords. Runs okay, wins 9 or 10 races, loses the championship to David Pearson. And I'll give him a pass on that because he had to get his cars from Holman and Moody. All factory Ford teams did, and you know they're not going to give you the best stuff because Pearson was driving for Holman and Moody. 1970, Petty Enterprises looks like they're going to have a good year. Pete Hamilton, back in the Plymouth Brigade with the winged Superbird, wins the Daytona 500. Then they go to Darlington. They had a spring race at Darlington back then, the Rebel 400. And this is all over YouTube if you want to watch a wreck, and it's scary. Well, Petty wrecks his Superbird in practice, and they don't even have 2 Superbirds. Hamilton wrecks his during the race, so Petty goes home and gets a short track Roadrunner and is trying to race the wing cars. He's hit the wall, damaged the steering, keeps going, crashes coming off turn 4 the outside wall, flips, hits the inside wall. Scary looking crash. Scary. Petty liked to chew these red shop rags. They're hanging out of the car and people thinking it's blood and guts. It's not. He is out about 7 races with a broken collarbone. Again, Lynda Petty has to endure that. But they get through the season. He has quite a few wins. Probably lost the championship with the races he missed that year. Probably if he could have run and just run decent in them, would have had the championship. But that's the nature of racing. Then, 1971, the Pettys are the only factory-backed team left in NASCAR. The factories have pulled out. Petty wins the championship. Frankly, doesn't have any competition, really, because any big money competition, because no other big money teams that had some sponsors run all the races. '72, Chrysler Corporation pulls out, so they have to worry about a sponsor. They're negotiating with STP, and Petty's wanting to keep the cars Petty Blue, and Andy Granatelli's cars have always been that Dayglow red or orange. Finally, the compromise is struck where they can run a blue and red paint job. In fact, later on, Granatelli's car won Indy with Gordon Johncock had Petty Blue on it, but wins the championship again, beating Bobby Allison. '73 loses the championship to Benny Parsons, but has a good year. '74 wins the championship again, no big deal. '75, Petty has one of the two greatest seasons in the modern era. Wins a whole bunch of races, clinches the championship early, but then when they went to Talladega in May, Randy Owens, and that's Lynda's brother, is killed in a freak pit road accident. So, tainted with tragedy there. '76 through '78, Yarborough wins the championship. Petty in '78 is driving that bulky Dodge Magnum after the Charger they gave it the next year aged out. So late in '79 he goes to Chevrolet, or late in '78 he goes to Chevrolet. Then '79 wins Daytona in that wild finish, and then wins the championship 8 years, last 7 championships. '80, he takes a bad crash at Pocono where he actually breaks his neck, but races the next race, gets out of the car, gets a relief driver early on. '81 wins his 7th Daytona. '83, '82 is uneventful. '83 rather, he wins Charlotte in the fall, but his engine's oversized and he's got left side tires on the right side. Highly illegal. Big fine, points deduction. '84 wins his 200th and last race. Frankly, probably should have retired. Then goes through, struggles through a couple more years. '88 takes that bad crash at Daytona, and Lynda Petty is reported to went to the infield hospital and said, "Are we still having fun?" Because Richard said he'd retire when it wasn't fun anymore. Races on through '92. Frankly, doesn't do much. Race too long. Lynda Petty had to endure all that. And let's go all the way to 2000. The future of Petty Enterprises was actually looking bright until they went to New Hampshire for a Busch race. Adam Petty, be the 4th generation Petty to race, is killed in a practice crash, and that's pretty much gloom and doom. But Lynda Petty endured a lot. I'm going to make this 2 parts because this is going to run longer than I like. The next part will be about Judy Allison, and she, in my opinion, went through more than Lynda Petty.